Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2! It's a challenge, Kakarot!
When performing the Enigma Dash, one must consider the fact that R2 cancellation still provides a means for shift activation. As one might recall, the momentum created by dash initiation is stored within the shift. As the Enigma Dash can be activated within the step-in barrier, immediate R2 cancellation can activate the shift within the step-in barrier as well. If such cancellation takes place within the step-in barrier, one may ask where the momentum for the shift is generated. Though the Enigma Dash may not have been active long enough to cover any distance or even break the step-in barrier, the force required for the shift to cover its natural distance is created by the initiation of the Enigma Dash, regardless of the distance traveled by the dash. As the shift may be aimed in any direction, this would imply that one can perform the Enigma Dash in one direction and then transition into a shift in an entirely different direction. Therefore, a practiced player may be able to perform a neutral Enigma Dash without covering any distance, seeing that the opponent is already directly in front of the player's character, and generate enough force for the shift transitioning to maneuver backward outside of the step-in barrier. As the R2 cancellation is used to initiate the shift into a mobile fighting stance, Super Blast ability is immediately available, thus eliminating the telegraphed backflip connected to any Super Blast, excluding the Super Explosive Wave. At this point, it is important for the viewer to note the significance of zoning properties, for a player can now dash into the opponent's step-in barrier and shift back out, and dash out of the step-in barrier and shift back in. Or for that matter, a player can dash within the step-in barrier and shift back out, or one can initiate a circumferential dash from outside the step-in barrier and shift forward into the step-in barrier. This, with the addition of strafe zoning, strafe teleportation, traditional zoning, and the fact that nearly all of these techniques can be linked together, proves the zoning aspect of Tenkaichi 2 to hold more depth than any traditional fighter, almost to the degree of impossible expectation. But don't worry, we're not done yet. Let's take a look at the grounded switch. Understanding the technical execution of the normal switch, we will now discuss how the grounded switch is performed. As previously explained, the switch is performed by directionally manipulating the shift to maneuver around the opponent for rear positioning. The grounded shift will allow us to do the same by incorporating the switch within the step-in barrier through Enigma Dash activation. This will allow a player to transition from a frontal position to the opponent's rear in a swift and effective manner while eliminating all telegraphs. Remember, even the offensive teleport requires the initiating melee attack for proper execution. This technique is fairly difficult to perform at first, but as with all things, training is the key to perfection. To perform correctly, the player must initiate a neutral Enigma Dash by pressing R1 and immediately pressing X. As the opponent will be standing directly in front of the player's character, an immediate R2 is necessary for the Enigma Dash to be cancelled correctly. As the Enigma Dash cancels, the grounded shift will be activated, fed by the force created by Enigma Dash initiation. As the shift is activated, the player must then press left or right in order to allow the momentum to shift the player around and past the opponent's position. This alone will simply place the player behind the opponent's profile. To conclude the technique for rear positioning, the player must hold forward as the shift reaches conclusion. As the shift is activated through R2 cancellation, the player is also granted descent sweep capability as well. However, it may take some practice to incorporate it into a grounded switch. Understanding that the grounded shift and switch are both movement-based techniques, the speed of such maneuvers are also based on the speed and size of the character. A character that is of the appropriate size for R2 cancellation and speed, such as Super Saiyan 2 Teen Gohan, will possess a grounded switch that is much quicker and more fluid than that of a larger, slower character, such as legendary Super Saiyan Broly. Once this technique is perfected, the player can see how effective this technique can be, for unlike the offensive teleportation, the grounded switch requires no key and gives no signs of activation. Also, depending on the character, the grounded switch may be faster than offensive teleportation as well. And lastly, unlike the offensive teleport that requires ground and pound incorporation and unlimited ki to exhibit unlimited movement ability, the grounded switch can be reactivated immediately after the previous grounded switch, for each grounded switch is initiated with a jump and is concluded with the descending cancel. Performing multiple grounded switches requires solid control. However, performing them without taking any damage against any attacking opponent requires the player to understand exactly how the combat system works regarding focal adherence and technical activation relating to orientation. Once the player can reach this level of control, he is performing what is known as the tango, which consists of 3 or more grounded switches as a means of maneuvering around the opponent damage-free, regardless of the opponent's offensive attempts. This tactic is great for position optimization and overall metagame dominance. Now that the concept of the grounded switch is understood, this next part should come easy. The side swiper uses an execution similar to that of the grounded switch, but with a simpler button sequence. While the grounded switch is built upon the manipulation of the inner core shift, the side swiper is activated with a side dash that carries half the distance to reach the opponent's rear. If a player were to use the Enigma dash to the side and immediately hold forward while initiating the grounded shift, he will approach the opponent from the side. At this exact position, initiations of physical melee will result with channeling to the front or to the rear of the opponent, depending on which profile the sided position resides. As repositioning to the front is a wasted technique, one must know when to perform the maneuver for proper rear positioning. As explained earlier in the series, each player possesses a certain level of aggression within their melee. As orientation releases its hold on the attacker until conclusion, the side swiper is used as a means of reaching rear positioning by baiting the opponent to attack. When the opponent attacks, one would use his own aggressive properties against him, for his offense will propel him forward, allowing a side swiper to position the player behind the opponent as he moves forward. Now, one could simply change the direction of the Enigma dash to incorporate a forward diagonal movement to help ensure rear positioning, but as the Enigma dash is performed by incorporating X, the player runs the risk of accidentally performing a grab attempt instead. Depending on how the opponent is conducting his combat approach, a poorly timed grab attempt may result with taking damage. Depending on how trained the player proves himself to be, one may be able to perform a tango variation through side swiper tactics. They are both, after all, performed within the flow of battle, exhibiting a dance-like behavior upon dangerous grounds. Now that we've seen what R2 cancellation can do with the Enigma dash, let us now see what R1 can do when properly applied. As explained before, the Enigma dash is both considered to be an aerial dash for R2 cancellation and a grounded dash for jump capability. As it should be understood by now, the Enigma dash itself is activated through the jump. Therefore, if performed correctly, one can execute an Enigma dash and follow it with as many supplementary Enigma dashes as he sees fit. This would suggest that no matter where the player is located, he can remain in a constant state of Enigma dash exhibition, allowing superior grounded movement that can be cancelled with R2 for grounded shift, super blast execution, or even jump-based attacks such as the jumping key blast flurry. As simple as Enigma dash strings may sound, they require a lot of control, a level of which not many players possess, Tenkaichi or otherwise. As the jump and descent incorporation allows further and even altered attacks and movements, you should now consider what options are available through ground and pound cancellation. Knowing that the player has the ability to cancel and plant one's feet with each R2 cancellation, this would mean that the player has the ability to incorporate ground-based attacks and even grounded will movement activations. The speed of such activation would stem from joining R2 cancellations with what is required from ground-based attacks or grounded will activation, as well as attributes relating to the character in use, such as size and speed relating to the opponent. This would include, but is not limited to, incorporating the jumping key blast flurry, the Enigma dash key blast flurry, the Enigma dashing melee and terminus, the Enigma super blast, the grounded switch, and so on. Now, as already discussed, a majority of traditional fight game competitors will voice their dominant value in the offensive aspect of depth relating to their respective games as a generalized understanding of overall depth. Not all competitors share the same mindset, specifically the higher level of players, but when discussing the depth of a fighting game, most players tend to push for details relating to all viable offensive options available during the flow of combat. To indulge the mentality, while terms such as priority and zoning may find placement, the concept of combo potential may come into play, and this is where we discover much controversy. The factors relating to the overall depth of Tenkaichi are not strictly offensive based. They stem from offense, defense, and movement. Such controversy is fueled by the traditional fight game expectation that once a combo is initiated, there should be no way for the victim to evade, block, nor otherwise stop the attack until the attacker has concluded the assault. To suggest that the victim would have any defensive options during such an operation of attack would be to say that the offensive system is lacking, and therefore the depth of the game is also lacking. In reflecting this concept, the deeper the offensive system is, the more shallow the defensive system should be. As most traditional fighters seem to place more stock in the offensive aspect of the game, this would also suggest that the traditional fighting game is not supposed to be that deep, or, if holding the correct level of depth, is not that balanced. If this suggested level of accepted depth of the traditional fighter is to be used as the standard for overall depth, then the balanced nature of Tenkaichi depth would be described as either too balanced or overflowing with depth. As we have now covered the basics of grounded will, we now understand that the shift is a maneuver that is created through movement cancellation, which, through the Enigma Dash, can be activated from a standing position through Enigma Dash transitioning. However, there are other maneuvers that can be created through mechanical exploitation. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we will introduce the slingshot. This is ZeroAnnihilated, and you are watching Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2 Evolution.